first off, let me say how long I've been waiting and hoping that you would do a record like this. And I am so excited.
Oh, cool, man.
Yeah, that Recovered is a real thing and that it's going to happen.
Sometimes it's the obvious ideas that are the hardest ones to get.
Well, I know this is also a record that you needed time to actually take place for the record to even be able to exist.
A friend of mine thought of it like 7 years ago, and I looked at the list of songs I had that I could reinterpret, and I just felt like I was missing a couple songs, and I had to wait a little while before those songs came around.
And I want to start back a little bit before it because, so Semisonic ends and you've been doing songwriting, but, that seems to be obviously the turning point where you become this songwriter for other folks. But I sort of wondered, did you ever look at it? Did this get in the way of a solo career, or did it sort of take the pressure off of having to overcome, being the 90s guy?
It's interesting. I have thought about this question a bit. When Semisonic ended, I had been on tour for quite a while. I was in Trip Shakespeare, and we toured for years. And then Semisonic obviously went around the world and everywhere between here and there for maybe almost 8 years. And when my first daughter was born, she was very sick and ended up staying in the hospital for 11 months. And I just kind of realized that for some period of time, I wasn't going to be able to tour as much as I had. And so I just kind of turned my attention to other things that I could do with my musical ambitions and my musical ideas, and I started picturing writing music for other people. And it became I thought it was going to be almost like a side thing, but it became, I don't know, I got a big resounding yes for it, and I ended up putting a lot of time and energy into it, and I'm glad I did.
And I know for creative people, needing a creative outlet, so it doesn't sound like there was that tugging force where you felt like you had to put something out that was your own name. Like this seems to have fed you enough, I guess.
Well, it's funny because in 2004 or so, I hooked up with Rick Rubin because he had heard some solo recordings that I was working on, and he was super into them. And we ended up kind of working on this record of mine for several years. And in between all the time we put into that album, which is called Free Life, he invited me a couple times to write with other artists that he was working with. And so I think he probably recognized that I could be helpful and creative on a different level with other artists. So it was part of it. And I think when people are the artists that I know, a lot of them could have been actors, and they could have been painters, and they could have been playwrights, but they just got a series of yeses that turned them into musicians, and that's one of the things we kind of just accept and love.
Is co-writing any different than writing with a band?
It's interesting. Co-writing for other people's records is partly different because you have to take into account what sounds right coming out of their mouth. And that's not always the same thing that sounds right coming out of my mouth. It has to be true to them, to the artist that's going to sing the song. On the other hand, I came up writing songs in bands with the other members of the band sometimes, and it was very collaborative already. The one thing about Recovered is interesting for me that there were a lot of songs probably I could have picked out of just, I love this song that I wrote with someone else. I would love to reinterpret this song. And then I tried them. I did demos of a lot of songs, like probably 35 or 40 simple demos of songs that I thought would be good to put on Recovered. And some of the ones that I liked a lot just didn't sound right when I sang them. It just didn't sound as, I don't know, it didn't sound as truthful, or it didn't sound as important, or whatever you want to say. It didn't sound as moving when I sang it as when the other person sang it. So sometimes I had to leave something off the list, even though I loved it a lot.
And there's some songs, and maybe it's just because I'm a fan and I wanted to hear it this way, but there were some songs when I would find out that you had written them, like, oh yeah, and I can hear his voice in that song. Like I think the prime example is probably All Will Be Well. Like the first time I heard All Will Be Well, I was like, oh yeah, that's Dan's song. That's
amazing. I've had friends tell me that about things that I've written, and it makes me happy. And imagine, like for me, like if I'm co-writing for somebody else, for Gabe Dixon, for example, if I can do something that sounds great when he sings it, that really sounds important and real and emotionally honest and interesting when he sings it, and then I can turn around and sing it myself, then it's sort of almost an indication that it's a pretty darn good song all in all.
Stands on its own.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know it's been talked about some, but to further that point, and no matter the genre, because you are all over the place when it comes to genre. Like, how much does that matter? Because there's the whole thing about, pop music is just pop music, and we're the ones who put the label on it. It's really just different clothes at the end of the day.
Right. I think I'm thinking about the records I like. The musicians I admire are pretty widely varied. When I first came up, I was really into Led Zeppelin, Elvis Costello. I was really into Sonny Rollins, Stevie Wonder, Jaco Pastorius. I was into kind of a Boston. I was into kind of a mishmash of rock records and jazz records, and Makes Me Want to Holler, and all kinds of different stuff. And so it seemed really natural later on for me to at least express interest to various artists of different styles. And it kind of became, I guess, part of my rep that I could work with artists of really different styles and the songs would be correct. And I think that's partly because I probably think of it as like very, very abstract, that's not exactly the right word. Very stripped down already in my mind. Mm-hmm. Like, I think about singing it at, a talent show or at open mic night with just a piano or just a guitar, or just a drum beat. Like, I think about when I'm writing a song, I probably don't think that much about the orchestration of it or the style of it, and more like, what would this be like if some talented 12-year-old sang it at a talent show at the junior high school.
And at that point, as we've learned from YouTube anyway, you can switch the genre.
It's become a huge thing.
Yeah, you can switch the genre on anything, at any point, at any old song. So
I know, it's true.
Yeah, it's fun. While we still have just a few minutes here, I would like to go through some of these songs specifically, and a few of the obvious ones and lesser obvious ones. Not Ready to Make Nice, I will say, is one of the most powerful songs of all time, still to this day. I get chills on the letter line. It's still to this day. Like, was that the turning point for you as the Rick Rubin and everything? Because I know he was involved with the Dixie Chicks at that point. And that seemed like that was pretty early on. That feels like it was one of the big turning points for you as a popular songwriter.
I had been co-writing for maybe 5 years before that, off and on, while I was still in Semisonic, and we were still really touring a lot. I would take time off, and I had an early co-write session with Carole King, who was one of my childhood heroes, and I learned a ton from that. So I had already been kind of maybe initiated or forged in the fires of nervousness or something on co-writing. But the Dixie Chicks session was the first one where I think I felt like I knew what the mission was. I knew that we had to make a statement for them that could be a kind of a reply to their critics, and that would be a personal statement from them. I really didn't want it to be particularly political. It just didn't seem like that was maybe the best thing for them to do. So I kind of knew in advance we had to write something intensely personal that would be a reply to their critics and that would have some righteousness. And all those things came together with the Chicks, who are so incredibly talented and passionate and honest and true, at least true to their own beliefs, beyond most of the people that we have met. Yeah. And it all came together in one place. And if it was a turning point, it was only because a lot of things that I had learned and a lot of things that I felt were important and a lot of things that they knew were inside them all came together in this one session.
And to this day, it's still such a definitive moment in their career that it doesn't seem like they've tried to top it at all. They have no interest in trying to top that.
Man, when they play, when the Chicks play Not Ready to Make Nice and their fans sing along, it pretty much raises the hairs on the back of your neck every time. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, no, I believe that. And, I would think that it would be harder to ever top that yourself, but then, of course, we have to bring up Adele.
Yeah.
And that's a song that changes everything for everyone. It takes her from being a pop star to forever generational. I mean, that's I don't know, comparatively, the Aretha moment, whatever you want to say. And I've heard you say that you had no clue that song had anything about it like that.
No, when Adele and I wrote Someone Like You, she told me later, and I believe it, that she knew everything had changed, that her life was changed, and her career was going to be a different thing than she had ever expected. And meanwhile, literally, I thought, well, that was a really good song. I hope I get to write with her again. Wow, she's amazing. But I didn't think anything about the what would happen, I guess, because in a way you can't control what happens, especially as a co-writer. You just got to check in on it once in a while and hope that something good happens. But I beyond that, though, I really didn't know. She knew, and the people around her knew, but I didn't know. And so, obviously, pleasantly surprised by how big it became.
And embarrassing parts of the question aside, without details, I mean, is this a song that sets you for life when it's that big?
Oh, well, it depends on how modestly I want my life to be lived, but if people keep buying it, I'm going to keep getting paid a little bit every time. So I don't mind if people keep buying it. And it's funny because the way songwriters get paid has changed even since Someone Like You. And writers now who are having their first hit, it doesn't set them up, even no matter how big it is. It's just not as the rewards are not as great for a songwriter that's starting out now. So I'm doubly lucky because I wrote it at the right time with her.
I remember I never researched this to see if it was a true statement, but I've always loved the quote, regardless of its facts. That someone asked Don McLean, "What does American Pie mean?" And he said, "It means I'm never going to have to write another song in my life."
That can be a two-edged sword, though. You can imagine, because if you wrote American Pie, let's say, something so epic and something so defining of a time, and that's almost like a strange pressure against an artist, because the artist knows that they'll always be compared against that song, and probably aren't going to beat it. And that's a lot for an artist to deal with. I think someone who can follow up a hit is worthy of a lot of respect, because following up a hit is a hard thing to do. The bigger the hit, the more your subconscious tells you, oh no, you ain't gonna beat me. It's just too big.
And I should bring up then, that's almost as surprising because you included Closing Time on this recovered record as well, right?
Yep. I wasn't gonna put Closing Time on the album. It was gonna be songs that I wrote with other people for their own purposes, for their own voices. And the idea of recovering those songs was me trying to put a different interpretation on the song, or trying to find something right for me about the song to sing it. And as the record came together, it just started to look like this sort of, even though strictly speaking it wasn't in the concept, Closing Time was this weird omission. And I would tell friends about the song list, and they'd go, "Oh, Closing Time's on it, right?" And I'd go, No, I don't think it's going to be on the list. And they would look, astonished, like, what? So I had to kind of rethink my idea of it, and I realized that it's an incredible part of the story, because most of the artists that I wrote the other songs with know about me because they heard Closing Time when they were, in college, going to bars, or in elementary school on pop radio.
Yeah. I mean, and in the way you're talking about it, though, it seems like the perfect thing to recover, because that's a song that's sort of been taken out there and, in a way, taken away from you just because the world has played it so many times, I guess.
I mean, to also talk about YouTube versions of songs. There are so many YouTube versions of Closing Time. It's like Kumbaya or something. It's just very busker friendly. You really you only have to learn those 4 chords to play it, and it's it's easy to remember, and there's just so many versions out there, and it actually presented an interesting question, because I could have just done a version that was just me on a guitar sounding like those people busking, but I decided to put it on the piano and see what would happen, and that was actually a turning point in a way for the record, because it did sound special and different that way.
I'm really happy that it got on there, and I appreciate some of the other things, like Mike Doughty's a big friend of mine, and the stuff you did, I love that. And Cory Chisel's a friend of mine, and stuff. That song, "Never Meant to Love You," is still just I hum that all the time.
Oh, that's so great. I mean, one of the missions of for me doing Recovered has to do with songs like "Never Meant to Love You" by me and Cory Chisel, because Cory obviously did a great version of that, and I didn't need to do a different version of it. But I just want as many people as possible to hear that song.
Yeah.
And I want people to, I want to point at least my, flashlight towards a talent like his. Or Mike Doughty. Producing 2 Mike Doughty albums was a real formative experience for me. It taught me a lot, and Mike and I had a really inspired run together. And Your Misfortune, I feel like, is a really powerful, reassuring song, and in coming from Mike, it's very moving. And so I felt like on this album I could choose a couple of those songs that didn't quite get the love that maybe I wished that they had, and I could give them some love myself.
Oh, it's so great. Like I said, I'm obviously fanboying a little bit over here and gushing about all this. I mean, you mentioned your hero Carole King, and I have it in my notes. I'm looking at it that you are a Carole King of this generation. It's just happened that way.
Whoa.
It's
wow.
A true statement, and I've said it before, and I will stand behind it. I appreciate your
so
songwriting so much.
Kyle, thank you so much, and thanks for saying that about Carole King, because that's like the gold standard for me of all gold standards. So Thank you.
Well, it's true, and thank you, and hopefully you end up around Louisville at some point, and we can see these live as well.
I would love to.
All right, well, take care, Dan, and thanks so much.
You too. Bye now.
All right, bye.